symptomatic than you expected, and maybe and that should have a huge ability to reduce fear, and it should be it's a very optimistic time, so that's good. The next thing that you get is 2 weeks later, which is now about, you do another round of testing. That next round of testing will show if someone went from negative to positive. That's called seroconverting. It means that they develop the antibodies during that interim period. And that's extremely valuable information because it shows what the rate of spread was, and if we've slowed it, and if it's been contained through the stay-at-home order. And also, it allows us to then take those people that did seroconvert, do a PCR swab, find out if they're actively infectious, and isolate them, and the whole town can basically get back to its new normal because you've really cleaned the population of the town and found out who has immunity and who hasn't been exposed.
What's interesting, though, is there's some material that came out, and a great deal of analysis about those cities and states that did the shutdowns faster, which should have protected them more versus later on, and then places where they're done none of that. And so when you say, seeing if the social isolation worked, we don't know what works. The body itself could be doing this, the body on its own, regardless of isolation. Isn't that true?
Well, I mean, I think this is the only way we'll know is if with the testing, and I think it's really important. I think that's why what the work is so important and the antibody tests are so important, is because you get real actionable data to fill in those gaps. And I think that with that, the leaders of our country and these communities can make informed decisions, and the companies can make informed decisions about getting back to work and kind of getting rid of the fear and getting back to work.
There's a lot of, in the media, discussion of young people, could be carrying the virus and they could then infect other people. And so we've seen all of these distancing elements, especially for the elderly, based upon this. And yet I've talked to other virologists and they're saying, listen, if your body actually has the virus and your body builds antibodies and defeats it, it does not pass it on. That's a part of the law of virology. So I'm confused because I'm hearing some doctors on television talking about one aspect and others talking about another. Doesn't your test, won't it show that if you've built the antibodies then that you're in a position where you're not going to be a person that's going to pass it on?
Yeah, absolutely. The combination. So once you have these IgG antibodies, based on the studies that have been done thus far with the virus, you are in the clear, right? It's you should get a cookie. It's like you made it through and everything's great, and like it's time to move along. I think the people that just to be safe with the double testing, the people that convert during that interim, I think that checking their family with the PCR and social isolation for that group that could be currently infectious is important. But the idea is, the 14-day period is sufficient that you're no longer actively infectious.
So if you're not actively infectious and you've built the antibodies, you're no risk to anyone else. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things that we're doing, and what you said is absolutely right. So basically, if you've developed the antibodies, I mean, what we're trying to do is separate into 3 different groups very quickly. One is, hey, you've been exposed to it, you're no longer infectious, you have antibodies, get back to work. You're, good for you. Like Lou said, you deserve a sticker. Then there's a second group, which is going to be the folks that don't have any antibodies, have never been exposed, and they're clean. So they're not infectious to others. So, they're not a danger to others. Now they have to know that they're still susceptible to catching it. So they have to take their own precautions, but, go back to the new normal. And then what you do is you isolate the people that are seroconverting or that, may need to be tested with PCR to see if they're actively infectious. And if they are, then quarantine them. So what you've done is you've isolated the people that need to, as opposed to isolate everyone, and let the rest of society kind of get back to a new normal. Now, one interesting thing that we've seen in San Miguel County is right now, I think we have about 8 PCR positively swabbed confirmed cases in that county. It's a county of about 8,000, so that's about 0.1%. What we've already seen in the antibody test, even though we haven't finished, is at least 1% with confirmed antibodies around there, and another 2% that look like they're high borderlines that may seroconvert. So you can already think about the ratio between what is confirmed via PCR, what we think is in the county, versus maybe it's a higher prevalence than we we anticipate, and so it's actually around us much more than we expect.
So I'm really curious, isn't it possible that this virus has been around a lot longer than the last 3 months? I mean, I was reading an article I pointed out the other day that said, so where does SARS go? And it was written 6 years ago. They talked about it's a coronavirus. Many things are. This is one particular, but this is 6 years ago. And they said at least 2/3 of the population will have this virus in their body. The vast majority will never even know it. Their body will handle it. Some might feel mild flu-like symptoms, and some will have extreme symptoms. I mean, it's like 6 years ago this was written. Isn't it possible that this virus is around us and the vast majority of people don't have any impact? It certainly seems that way from the testing we're seeing so far when we get to people that are asymptomatic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. And actually, I don't know enough to talk about it, but it does seem, and I've heard lots of reports and seen lots of studies that it has been around from beginning, definitely before the new year. And there's actually a question as to its origination and the fact that it was probably even circulating and just confused for the flu in many instances.
The truth of the matter is it's something that might be like, people have cancer cells in their body right now. And, you can swab the back of somebody's throat and, you can find they got streptococcus germs, they don't have strep. It's an immunal situation really more than anything else, because that's who's really dying in this case, whether they have it or not. Hospitalizations, not the case numbers, but the hospitalizations and then the deaths are the things that really matter to our society the most. And it seems to be an infinitely small number and getting smaller as we test more people, which should give people a little bit more hope.
I think that's really what it's about. I think the information is going to make is give people a tremendous amount of hope and a tremendous amount of empowerment. I'm a believer that people are extremely capable and extremely smart, but they can't make good decisions with bad information. So I think that the testing is critical. It allows us to know, and really evaluate this accurately and understand what the risk level is. And like you mentioned, and it's really about getting a handle on what real math is. Like what's real science, the real math, what's the real morbidity. And the only way we're going to know that is by testing. And when we test, what we're going to find out, like May implied in the county and like we're going to see around the country, is that these rates are probably going to be higher than we think, and the morbidity associated will probably be lower. And that doesn't detract from the need for a vaccine to help immunocompromised people and other people that would be subjected to the illness. But it's I think it's really about getting people information.
So how do you plan to get the tests out? You're doing this initial study in Telluride. You're going to do the follow-up starting tomorrow, it sounds like, you'll be on your 2-week marker. So you'll have a sense of what's happened. What happens at the end of this? How do you get this out? I know you're working through